Hello everybody, it's Aaran back from Screenstars, and I'm here once again at Geek Legion of Doom to bring you another review. And today's review is for the 2020 horror film The Retreat, a film that is written and directed by Bruce Wemple, and it stars Grant Schumacher, Dylan Grun, Chris Kimperman, Rick Montgomery, Peter Stray, and it focuses on two best friends who go on a backpacking trip. One of them's getting married, and it's their one last chance to get away together to have some fun. Now, before they set off on this backpacking trip, they stop at like an Airbnb place, and there are some weird pictures around this place, and the owner explains that there is the legend of the Wendigo out on the hills, and to, you know, while he doesn't believe, to be careful when they're out and about. And then when they go backpacking, some strange occurrences take place and the whole thing escalates violently and psychologically. Right, what are my thoughts on The Retreat? This film in many ways reminded me of the film The Ritual, the film that came out, was it 2017, something like that, the British made horror. Similar concept, backpacking into the woods, and like supernatural events take place and strangeness and creatures, all that kind of stuff. So they kind of shared that similarity, even though there are some differences. This one is a little bit more psychological than The Ritual, and to be honest, it's not as good as The Ritual. There's a few reasons for that. I mean, I think the things that work for this film that I really quite enjoyed is it's got a real nice atmosphere. It builds up the legend of the Wendigo at the beginning. I like the creature Wendigo. When we see it in TV shows, movies and stuff like that, it's always a creature that interests me. When I see it in Supernatural, I think that was the second episode where we saw one of them. And in other movies and stuff, it's quite an interesting creature, and it featured heavily in the video game Until Dawn as well. So it's quite an interesting creature, and they approach it slightly differently. It's more psychological, this creature, in a sense of it kind of gets into your mind and makes you dream certain things and makes you give you different realities and all this kind of stuff. So it's quite a psychological approach here with the Wendigo, but you do see scenes of this creature, and I must admit the design I really enjoyed. So the setting was really good, this really snowy, hilly setting that was filmed really nice and beautifully, and there was a real sense of dread, and the music really emphasised that as a really loud music soundtrack, a bit like, it reminded me of Insidious, you know, when the music was just way over the top just to get your nerves up. This film took a similar approach. It got a little bit much, the soundtrack, at times, because it was like really in your ears, but it definitely isn't subtle. You know when something's happening because the music tells you it's happening, and I did think there were 2 or 3 scenes where we didn't necessarily need the music. There was a couple of really nicely shot scenes where all you see is a couple of eyes in the darkness. Now that's enough for me to give me the creeps. I don't need the massive booming soundtrack to, you know, scratch my ears almost to tell me those eyes are there. I saw them, it creeped me out. So I think the music was used cleverly sometimes and too much in other areas, if you like the soundtrack. But I did like the whole approach, if you like, the way it looked and everything like that. The performances I thought were fine throughout. Grant Schumacher, who essentially carries this film, does a decent enough job. But I think essentially where this film kind of loses its way, it's very watchable, the first half, and then the second half it falls into this kind of trope of you don't know what's real and what isn't anymore. Now that's okay to some degree for some aspects of the film and for what they want to show, but that's essentially all you get for the rest of the film. These different sequences, and you're thinking, right, okay, is this really? Get scenes of him in what I'm presuming is like a psychiatrist's office. Other scenes where it appears he kind of makes it out, so you get like a descent type approach where he thinks he's made it out, and then it's turned on its head, and he's not. He's back in there in the thrust of it. His friend's dead. He potentially killed him and ate him, and then in the next scene he's alive and they're still trekking through the woods. So it's constantly flipping and changing, and that's what you get pretty much for the whole rest of the film. And it gets a bit tiresome because you don't trust anything you see anymore, and that's kind of the point, I guess. But you disengage as an audience member to some degree, because you kind of think, right, well, this isn't real, it's just another sequence, another dream sequence. And that's what you get throughout the whole thing. And then the film finishes quite predictably with, you know, what you would expect, if you like. So it's a bit of a film in two halves, this one. First half I really liked the atmosphere, the way it drew you in. A foreboding sense of something happening, a sense of confusion as to what's happening, little sights of the creatures here and there, a couple of more close-ups of the creature. It really whetted your appetite for what was ahead. And then I didn't like the second half as much, I'll be honest, because it got a little bit frustrating for me, because I just wanted it to give me a little bit of a dose of reality. Okay, what is the reality here? What is going on? And it's the second half of the film is far more psychological than the first half. The first half is more pure horror, I would say, or leaning more towards that. The second half, it moves far more towards the psychological side of horror. But I liked, for the most part, its approach on The Legend of the Wendigo. I think this film had an awful lot of potential, but I just didn't think it delivered on all counts. So I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. It is a pretty interesting film. There were aspects of it that I did enjoy, the creature design, things like that, and the foreboding atmosphere of the film. So it is worth checking out if this is the sort of horror film that you think might be for you. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review, and of course I will be back, and Leo will be back with more reviews on Geek Legion of Doom very soon.